Hey, it's me, Rob Ryan. Welcome back to another episode of Entrepreneurial Thinkers. And this week's conversation is incredible. It's frankly a gift to you of both energy and insights, data, statistics, trends, and the reasons why we should care about the things we care about. If you're an entrepreneur or an investor, you know how hard it is to be an entrepreneur or an investor. And today I have the pleasure to sit down and have a long conversation with Erika Lucas, who joined me from the middle of America in Oklahoma, Edmond, Oklahoma. She is the founding investor and founding principal behind both Stitch Crew and Invest Her, which is a sister fund of a peer network program that they built. And she does, and her team, do incredible work in building entrepreneurial economies and building entrepreneurial communities, and then thus building up entrepreneurs. Heavy emphasis on helping and dealing with and supporting entrepreneurs and business owners of color, of women, as they refer to them as the new majority entrepreneurs, really focused on not necessarily working from 0 to 1 as an entrepreneur and how do you get there, but how do you get from 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, so to speak. And so if you're a small business owner, a business executive, if you're a woman, an investor, if you're a limited partner investor, this is the type of group you want to be working with and partnering with. If you're a community organization, this is the type of group you want to be working with and partnering with. And we went deep and wide in this long conversation in which we understand that everything comes down to community. Everything comes down to our political purposefulness as human beings and as citizens here in the US or anywhere. And everything comes down to just kind of putting in the work, even though you know that the results might be hundreds of years down the line, and creating that legacy of impact to, as we try to do on this show every week for you, leave the world a little bit better than we found it. So I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as Erika and I did making it for you. Hola, hello, hi, bienvenido, and welcome back, or welcome to Entrepreneurial Thinkers. You know that this is the show where I get to have weekly conversations with the best and brightest entrepreneurial thinkers across all sectors and segments of our society and industry, as we come together in conversation, hopefully to try and leave the world a little bit better than we found it by the time we're done. Today, I'm super grateful to be joined by the unstoppable force that is Erika Lucas. She's the founder and investor at Stitch Crew and Invest. But first, before we dive into all her background and all her knowledge and all the wisdom she's going to share with us today, let me tell you a little bit more about her. So she is, in my opinion, just based on what I've seen since we were referred to meet one another through another show alumnus and a great friend, she's a national treasure. She's a leader of both economic and human development across the United States. Her voice and her work emanates from her home in Oklahoma, but is evidenced by any article that ever mentions her, by her TED Talk, or even by her showing up on Vice President Harris's recent Oprah Winfrey election special. Her reach is boundless within our American entrepreneurial economy. She's the founder of Stitch Crew, an organization that provides capital and programming to what she calls, and she's going to explain this to us later, new majority entrepreneurs, as well as she's a principal investor and owner at Invest, which is a peer network and investment fund for women professionals and women-led companies building solutions at the intersection of the care economy and the future of work, which we are also going to have her explain to us what those things mean. After a successful career in economic development at the state of Oklahoma and a private equity career with Acorn Capital Management, Erika and her husband Chris launched Stitch Crew in 2017 to democratize access to capital, always a good thing, resources, and social networks. Stitch Crew supported more than 200 women and minority-owned startups and partnered with big global brands like the Oklahoma City Thunder, which is a huge brand in Oklahoma City and the state of Oklahoma, and is a big brand in the NBA, BASF, Google, and I'm sure many, many others, as well as government agencies and different philanthropic organizations. I'm super excited to have this conversation because I feel like it's been a couple weeks in the brewing here. So welcome to Entrepreneurial Thinkers, Erika. It's really great to have you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me. I've been listening to a couple of your episodes and wonderful guests, wonderful energy, and wonderful conversations that I think need to take place.
Thank you for the kind words. And that last statement is absolutely true. Mm-hmm. We do this because I fundamentally believe all of these conversations need to take place. And so the more of them that we can have, and if that can be my little part of my legacy to the world, like, let's do it, right? So in that vein, I've got first kind of a fun question for you. before we get too serious and start to try and figure out how we're going to fix the world. So you have said, you said in a recent post that you wrote, like that all things are political, right? And so are we, essentially. And so having said that, as the kind of umbrella, what was it like to be on the Oprah Winfrey Show / Vice President Harris's recent electoral event that she held? I think the event was in Michigan, but you were one of like thousands of little tiny Zoom screen people that were on all these incredible video boards. Like, just what was that experience like for you personally?
Oh my gosh, I can't tell you that. And I don't know if I can accurately describe it. Not so much. I mean, obviously, always been an Oprah fan. Who isn't? Obviously, always. I mean, I invest in women, but I think this particularly election has such a huge impact on women, on everyone, right? But particularly on women. So I think that there's a lot of things that made it special for me. Obviously, Oprah. Obviously, a candidate that's a woman of color, that's really has tangible solutions for us to be a better society moving forward, right? And then so that put that, I mean, wow, right?
Sure. Yeah.
In addition to that, to see how other groups have owned their own identity and
Right.
came together to support a woman of color running for the biggest job in the world, it just meant so much. You know, you had cuts for Kamala, you had Latinos for Kamala, you had white dudes for Kamala, you had, and it's just, I think it tells you a lot about this ticket, right? That she's been able to get people first, let people be who they want to be and identify
Yep.
however they want to identify. And then for
Yep.
all of these groups to come together and support, I think just talks about how much as humans we're craving unity and the ability to move forward together rather than just continue to be in this divisiveness
Yeah.
created. So it meant the world to me.
No, it was awesome. And again, out of those like hundreds and hundreds of Zoom boxes from all over the country, probably the world, like you had lucky, you were like pretty well positioned. You were like right up in the front of that one row on that one screen. Was it, this is a silly technical question, just because I was curious as I was watching it, like, was it basically just a big Zoom meeting?
So they had us in different like group Zooms, right? And it could have been that they put you with your group, which was, Cat Ladies for Kamala, for example,
Yeah.
or, Latinos for Kamala. So they had different groups. So I don't know how they managed such a mass.
Yeah, like the technical part of it was the fast. Like I'm like, I mean, did she just log into a Zoom group and then somehow they put that group on and the like? It was like just from an event standpoint, I was fascinated by how they pulled that off because even in this world of remote, kind of like mixed hybrid meetings, events, all that kind of stuff, I felt like I've seen lots of formats in the last 4 years, but not that. Like that was really impressive.
Yeah. And I've gotten thank you for saying that, my little square was like right. I got that from a lot of people like, oh my gosh, we could see you all the time throughout the entire event. I think it
Yeah,
just has to do with I had good lighting
yeah,
and I was genuinely so excited to be there that I think, and sometimes when you do Zoom calls and Zoom meetings, it's hard to like really express emotion. And I just felt all of the emotions. And I think maybe that's what
yeah.
just kept me on there.
That's awesome. No, that's great. You're good. You were a good audience member, as they would say. That's awesome. All right. So, okay. So first big serious question. This is a little bit of context from my humble opinion, right? So we're 45 years into an experiment in a style of capitalism, which we've now clearly proven did not trickle down to take care of everyone everywhere, right? So I ask you, I don't expect you to bear all the responsibility of this answer, right? But I ask you to begin this conversation by helping me understand, like, how do we build differently than that? Like, how do we for the next 45 years build an economy that provides for everyone instead of the trickle down, not veiled attempt by me to point at the Reaganomics of the 1980s is essentially what we've now realized is the root cause of so many of our inequities and our brokenness. How do we build a better economy? Not just now, like Vice President Harris has the like. How do we literally people like you, long before Vice President Harris decided to run for president, were already laying the groundwork for how we build a better, more inclusive, more equitable, more diverse economy for the next 50 years, right? For the rest of my life, for sure, probably for the rest of your life. So how do we begin to do that?
Yeah. I think one, we do need to go back to focusing on community rather than the individual. That's one. And we need to fix systems to do that, right? Because for so long, we have built up systems by worshiping individuals, whether they're self made billionaires or self made entrepreneurs or self made companies, whatever. And then we just cater everything to that, right? So one of the reasons I started doing what I do now is, I was tired of hearing this false narrative of the, traditional media. The way they often portray successful entrepreneurs is by highlighting very few people and telling the story of, this lone wolf, self-made billionaire that started with very minimal resources
Yes.
in their garage.
The classic American bootstrap cowboy story, which is always white men.
Exactly. And we've all heard it, right? Like,
Right.
we've all heard it. And that makes for a fantastic story. But unfortunately, it's not the case for a lot of people, right? A lot of these gentlemen that they usually focus on had a lot of access. And I'm not just talking about capital access, although, that's proven. Like, generational wealth is definitely what the fastest way to build a billionaire, right? Generational wealth, that there's access to not just capital, but access to networks and access to Ivy League education. All of those things matter. And so I think that, and then unfortunately, when it comes to building systems in banking and capital access and venture capital and policies, we then focus on those successful few as opposed to the massive. And so I think that you asked, how do we get to a more equitable playing field? I think first we need to start investing in rebuilding, middle class America, instead of just focusing on those few. Because even as business owners, we do better when the middle class is doing well, right? We need to stop measuring our economy just based on how well the stock market is doing. Because again, less than 10% of people own most of those stocks. So it's disproportionate the way we've been building our economy, the way we've been building our systems that benefit only the few. So
Yeah.
that's how I would fix it. Obviously, a lot of intricacies in between how we do that, but in an overview, that's what I would say.
Yeah, no, and access. Like, I mean, that's one of the key words that jumps through kind of no matter which portion of it you're referring to, right? Is access. We need more access here. We need more access here. We need more access here. We need more access here, right? The systems, as you say, cultural systems largely, right? And then institutional systems have just become so, I was almost going to say like naively, like unintentionally, right? Like exclusionary, but it was intentional, right? It wasn't overtly intentional, but it was systemically intentional.
Yeah.
And so essentially we wound up exactly where what the design of those policies, the kind of trickle economics, kind of free market capitalism version that we tried, we've wound up exactly where it was designed to take it, right? So that's probably also, I guess, some of the disconnect between those that have benefited from it almost exclusively and those that have been left behind by it. Is those that have benefited are like, what are you talking about? The system's not broken.
Yeah.
Like, it's working fine. I employ a lot of people in my company, and aren't they happy that I employ them? Like, isn't that enough?
Yeah.
And then they have no sense of how many of those people at their company, when they leave their shift, they go to work at some other company. And then when they leave that place, they pick up some side hustle work on the weekends to, again, just to eventually just pay their bills.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's access is one of the key foundations. You talk in all of your work, in all of your presence online, which is incredibly both informative as well as just entertaining, just being honest, right? So good job on all that. But you talk about a lot of things across a wide spectrum of things, but you most specifically talk about three things that I would love. Maybe we could kind of set some baselines right now for then how when we refer to these things in the rest of the conversation. One, you talk about the new majority economy. So let's explain what that is to our audience. Two, you talk about the care economy, which I'm fascinated to hear you describe and help us understand what that is. And then you talk about the future of work, which is a phrase that gets bandied about a bit more. But I want to hear your interpretation of the future of work. And so if we can set those baselines right now, help me understand those three things, I think it'll help our audience understand the rest of the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first, the new majority economy, right? So I think that oftentimes we refer to groups based on, here are the Latinos and how well the Latinos are doing, or here's women, or here's, based on gender, race, or whatever demographic. But if you pull us all together, we are the new majority, right? I mean,
Okay.
women already represent women, been a while, but women already represent 50% of the population, 50% of the labor force. We control 85% of consumer spending. We represent 40% of corporate purchase, or we make 40% of corporate purchasing decisions. So women already are there, right? Either on par or ahead in many cases. So I would consider them part of the new majority. If you put Latinos, same way. Right now, we only represent 20% of the population in the United States, but we also represent 65% of the net projected growth in the next 10 years, right? So
Yeah.
it's going to continue to grow. And if you pull us all together, we are the new majority. And so
Okay.
I talk about that a lot because I think that oftentimes when we're talking about the economy or access to opportunity, access to capital, access to resources, access to networks, a lot of people pigeonhole us as charity work, or oh, they're doing charity work for women, or they're
Right.
doing charity work for Latinos. But I see it as an investment, right? As a way, no, that is the future. I mean, if you
Yep.
want to employ in the future, you're going to have to tap into these groups or this new majority. If you want to sell, to the masses and the most amount of consumers, you're going to have to tap into this new majority. So it's a
Yeah.
business decision. It's the right thing to do for sure. So from a moral perspective, but it's
Sure.
also it makes economic sense. It makes good business sense, and it makes a good investment case.
Yeah, like who wouldn't, right? If we were talking about anything generically, like who wouldn't say, oh, yeah, hey, can you point me towards like a really rapidly growing market with a lot of economic power and opportunity? Because like that's where I'd love to open my business, or that's where I'd love to invest my monies, right? Like, of course, that it was funny. I was listening to you just now, and it actually, this is incredible because you literally just made me think of something that's so macro and so embedded in our lives, but totally differently than I think I ever have. Two things come to mind. One, I think I wonder if some of this feeling of, from say the old majority, some of this feeling of like, oh, it's philanthropical, oh, they're just do-gooders, oh, it's that, right, that vibe comes from the fact that like as our economy evolved the first couple times, the last couple 100 years, right? Like it was the economy, the old majority economy that was designed by the old majority people, which were white men, right? And they didn't have to go out and advocate, and they didn't have to go out and preach a new way, and they didn't have to go out and convince anybody. They just basically bulldozed us from nothing, which in that sense, like, hey, okay, cool. It worked for the times, right? Maybe in some ways, but like they bulldozed us from nothing to this is the system,
Right.
right? And everybody. So I wonder part of it is just literally like a literal intellectual disconnect to not understanding like why are they doing all this advocacy stuff like the economy is just the economy, it'll just and it's like, well, no, because we're forced to advocate for a better different way.
Yeah.
I've never really thought about it that way, and then as I'm listening to you, I'm like, I think this might be it. I think this might be part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah, interesting. That's fascinating. Yeah, we could dive onto that all day, but let's go separate. So two other things, right? So you talk about the care economy, and then you talk about the future of work. So what is the care economy?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you actually touched on it a little bit, and I do think that the disconnect somewhat comes from how we build, again, systems, how we build companies, how we build the labor force. back when we started, right? Which was very much center on a very specific demographic, right? And so the way we've been building corporations and businesses really had one person in mind, right? Or one customer persona, if you will, or one type of employer or employee persona. And that employee persona tended to be a white male with a support system at home that benefited from us, somebody that
Yep.
would take care of caring for children or parents or grandparents, managing the household, doing all of the stuff that you must manage outside of your 9 to 5, if you will.
Yeah.
And fast forward to today, unfortunately, those workplaces haven't changed much, right? And they still only serve a very specific type of persona. And that needs to change because we're seeing it in real time. I think that COVID let some shine into how many women had to exit the labor force to care for loved ones, to sacrifice their career so that their employer or their significant other would have to go back home. Why? Because most of the time they make more than we do, right? Because we still have a pay gap, a wealth gap. And so fast forward to now, I fundamentally, and it's not just my belief, data shows that women have burdened the economic impact of our broken care infrastructure, right?
Okay.
So when you look at, again, women represent 50% of the labor force, but we still do work at work, and then we still come home and have to care for our loved ones, have to manage the household, which oftentimes gets us away from the labor force.
Right.
Only second to retirement, caregiving responsibilities are the number two reason why mostly everyone quits the labor force, but particularly
Wow.
women, right? Because as a society, we
Right.
place
Right.
that responsibility on women. And so it's disproportionately affected women in terms of being able to fully participate in the labor force, which then affects our wages. It affects our wealth, right? Because we take breaks in our careers.
Sure.
And by the way,
Yeah.
even if we take breaks and we come back, same position or higher or whatever, that break still reflects on our wealth.
Yeah. Right.
And so that's what I mean by the care economy and how it's broken
Okay.
is it's keeping working families for fully participate in the labor force, particularly women, and it's just not working, right?
Yeah, and frame and giving putting a name to it, like so framing it up so that we can get it into the discourse, so that people can start to think more narrowly and specifically about it, as opposed to just, as you say, like kind of this amorphous amalgamation of a bunch of different things that we all know are true, right? But if it's not able to be concise and bite sized, so to speak, so we give it a title, we give, and then we refer to it as the care economy, and then as you just did, we back it up with all kinds of statistical data that proves the point.
Exactly.
Okay.
And by the way, it's not just something that does good for women or working families. It's projected to be $600 billion, a $600 billion industry, which is actually bigger than the pharmaceutical industry if you think about
Yeah.
it. But you know why we haven't thought about it? Because I think there's also a disproportionate number. If you look at the investment space, right? Less than 10% of investment professionals are women that have decision making abilities. Obviously, you
Right.
have
Right.
associates and you have assistants, and venture
Sure.
capitalists
Sure.
always like to say, "Oh, we're very diverse," but most of their diversity
Yeah.
is in.
Our head of our entire platform team is women, but all the investment decision partners are men. Yeah. That's
But
really diverse.
yeah, but when you look at the investment space, particularly when it comes to to decision making professions, less than 10% are women, less than 2% are people of color, right? And so every time I go and speak to an LP or even VC colleagues, most of the time I'm speaking to males that have a support system at home. So they
Sure.
don't understand what I'm saying. What do you mean? What do
Right.
you mean the care economy? What do you mean? Or they immediately go to childcare, which I think is one sector, right? Childcare is
Right.
very important, and of course it affects a lot of us. But there's also elder care, home-based care,
Yeah.
disability care.
Yeah.
Getting a divorce is care.
And progressive all those metrics, including that last one, progressively increasing, like
Yes,
progressively trending upward, like right. So obviously, yes, childcare has been the dominant kind of topical point of relevancy for say the last 50 years, but like elder care, parent care, all that stuff is already exploding and about to go through the roof
Exactly.
as we age as a society, right? And yeah, that's wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
And going back to what I said at the beginning, like how do we make this economy more inclusive or able to work for everyone? I think, I mentioned like going from the individual to focusing on the community. I think we placed a lot of the responsibility of care into the individual as opposed to us collectively as a system or as a community or as a society or as institutions, but it's not working, right? Like
yeah,
I was having this conversation. We actually, part of Stitch Crew, we provide grants to women and people of color that are starting businesses in certain
right,
industries. And we have a program called the Future of Women at Work that is providing $10,000 grants to women-led companies that are building solutions in the care economy and future of work. And we just had a retreat in New Mexico, and one of the questions was, why do you think that people don't pay attention or have, I mean, if it's this big of an
right,
industry and it's this big of a problem, why are people not paying attention? And again, because it's always been the blame has been placed on women,
yeah,
like, or on the caregiver, right? It is my
right,
responsibility as a wife, as a female, to care for my children, to care for
yeah,
my mother, to care for my grandparents. Proof and point, just look at the vice presidential candidate, right? JD Vance.
right,
He still thinks that the way to fix our care crisis is to ask your grandma or aunties to care for
right,
your kids. Again,
right,
we're not addressing the economics of it. We're not addressing how it impacts working families or women, or the economy in general. There's a lot of employers, particularly in the middle of the country, that simply don't have enough workers. So they project growth, but they don't have enough people to work. So we need to get these
yep,
people into the labor force. So this is an economic problem, which, by the way, the Boston Consulting Group estimates that the U.S. is going to start losing $290 billion a year if we don't fix our care crisis.
yeah. That's powerful, and that essentially leads to now you've made it clear. Like that essentially leads very transitionally to kind of how you define the future of work, right? So when you say future of work, you're talking about just a more holistically designed,
Right.
better human centered, my phrase, not yours, right? Like human centered kind of approach to work, that takes into consideration all of these variables with the intent to still produce, just to be clear, like a point of emphasis, with the intent to still produce, or frankly, just the intent to produce great economic outcome, right? So this isn't like we're taking something like, hey, we need to make a little less profit so we can be more caring. No, what we're saying is in pure business economic terms, like we would talk about any problem that we would solve.
Yeah. It's an
If we solve
infrastructure.
X, yeah, if we solve X infrastructure, Y will unleash greater economic opportunity.
Exactly.
Period. End of sentence.
Exactly. So in one way, we need to fix the infrastructure, right, so that we can achieve sustainability. And in another way, we need to create workspaces that are designed for other people, right? So going back to like workplaces were designed very specifically with one person in mind, well, that doesn't work anymore, right? And you're
Right.
seeing that because even though we have more women in the C suite, even though we have more women graduating college and joining the labor force at a faster rate than ever before, 50% of those women that have achieved C-suite position are burned out. And most of them are deciding to quit the labor force,
Right.
right? Entirely, or downsize their career just because they're tired. So it's not
Yeah.
work. And again, if women represent 50% of the population, 50,
Right. That's 50% of our workforce, 50% of our buyers,
exactly,
50% of our spenders.
exactly. So it's
Yeah,
not
we're exhausting them by we've created a culture and a set of like economic model that says like you're come to the workforce, come like you get all these rights that you didn't have as recently as like the 1970s, right? Like you get to do all this stuff, but oh, by the way, we still want you to do all the stuff that we were expecting you to do from like 1700 to now. Like, so you still have to do all those things, but welcome to the rest of it.
exactly,
Yeah, that's just yeah,
exactly.
with no, it's just nonsense. It would literally be nonsense in any other discussion, if not for this kind of cultural albatross of as we would say in Latin American countries, machismo, right? That has just stuck itself into what we do. Okay, all right. So we're not going to turn the entire podcast into just that discussion, but that's incredible. Thank you for those insights, and just it informs so much of where you how you think, right? Which is really the whole purpose of this. Is I'm trying to always discern from these really smart, good people that I talk to, like you, right? Is how can we apply these kind of new entrepreneurial thinking mentality, this different mindset to create the better future. So the future, since we're talking about it, right? We're rapidly hurtling towards what you and I know, and most people know, is an inevitably more multicultural, diverse country. It's just going to happen. It's going to happen whether everybody and their grandmother tries to fight it and says they wish it wouldn't happen. It's going to happen whether they try and legislate against it. It's going to happen if they build 1,000-foot walls around the entire country and put a dome over the top. It's still going to happen, right? So we're hurtling towards this inevitably, which I think, by the way, is awesome, multicultural, diverse country. I liken the period, I would like your opinions on this, and I've got a question. I liken this period, say 2000 to 2050, that we're kind of in now, as far as economic, cultural, and immigration driven transformation. I liken this a lot to, say, like the 1920s to the 1970s, which was fueled then by World War I and World War II,
Mhm.
right? But the outcome of that period was that we became what we look like now, right? Which was invariably much more diverse and much more multicultural than we were in 1910 before World War One, right? And that's what's fundamentally made us the country that we are. So if the hypothesis is we are in the middle of exactly that again, just triggered by different catalyzing events and different circumstances, how, there's the question, like, how should folks understand this era that we're in right now as a massive growth opportunity for the United States, as opposed to interpreting it as some sort of like regressive backwards loss of something that the country is taking from them? Like, how help us understand, because I suspect you live in the mindset of this is a massive growth opportunity.
Mhm.
So help the general populace listening to this, like, help them understand to see it as a massive growth opportunity and not as something we're taking away from them.
Yeah. I think we need to address the real issues that are making people feel like they are being left behind, right? Regardless of race, regardless of gender. I don't know if you mentioned this. Oh, you did mention this in your intro, but I live in the middle of the country, right? Where a lot of people are feeling left out of the innovation economy, of the tech economy, where a lot of people are anti DEI or have this anti DEI sentiment, right? But I think that if you talk to those people, ultimately what they feel is that they have done the work but have felt left out, right? Because industries have shifted, because things have, economies have shifted, and they didn't shift with them. So I think that it ultimately goes back to our human selves, that some of us are doing very well and some of us are not, right? And this is creating divisiveness. This is creating violence in our community. This is creating us not to get along with our neighbors. And I think that ultimately it boils down to our individuals and families able to provide security to their family, security and economic opportunity to their family. And if the answer is not, it's very easy to blame immigrants. It's very
Always,
easy.
always, not just now, right? I mean, literally, it's like it's in our United States
Exactly.
country playbook. Yeah.
But I challenge people, if you hear that, like if you hear an individual, instead of coming up, okay, so you're not doing well, your family's not doing well, the economy's not doing well. If the individual goes towards blaming a specific group of people versus providing real solutions or really addressing the real issue, right? Why are there not more jobs in rural America? Why are manufacturing jobs going away? Why did they shift it? How do we get them back? If we're not having this conversation and instead we're just blaming people, that is a strategy in communications called diffusion, right? Like you distract people from the real issues because you either lack the depth, you don't want to address the real problem, and or you don't know the real solutions. So how do we So I think that has led to a scarcity mindset,
Sure.
to a mindset of feeling left out, and it's caused fear in a lot of communities, right? And what do we do when we're afraid? We kind of shy away from it, and we're like,
Sure. And yeah, and we close in. I mean, like on a as you would say, it's such a great comparison, right? Is kind of this simultaneous, like there's the individual, we draw inward, right? We become more overly protective of ourselves and what perceived threats might exist or might not exist around us. But that also is like the metaphor for what happens as a country, right? You go through these periods. If you study history, you go through these periods of like the battle, frankly, pre about 1910 to 19 like, and then definitely like pre World War II when FDR was coming in office. The battle in the country was like between this protectionist, isolationist mentality, which was very anti-immigrant, like, and that's just 100 years ago,
exactly.
right? Like, so we're back, so we cycle through these same kind of tropes, and yet, to your point, like it just if I think it's critically important to reinforce for our listeners and then just for everybody else is just this idea, like if we hadn't had what happened then, like if my thesis is even remotely correct, right, and that period from 1920 to say 1970s resulted in the amazing opportunity economy in the country that we have, right? Like if we didn't have that happen, we wouldn't be here, and if we weren't here, we wouldn't be have anything to argue about going forward,
Exactly.
right? We'd be, and it wouldn't be this like, well, it would have been better because it would have just been us, right? Like no, like you would have been a smaller, less relevant country with a less powerful economy. You never would have become the global like manufacturing power that you became coming out of World War II, et cetera. I mean, in a weird, funny way, I'm looking at the both of us here. I don't know this about you. I've made some presumptions based on my research. I guess some generation of your family prior to you somewhere was from another country,
Yeah.
right? So was mine, right? Like 4 generations ago, my prior people in my family lived in Ireland.
Hmm.
And had they not come over 4 generations ago, and had someone in your family not come from wherever they came from originally, like you and I wouldn't even be having this conversation. You would never have been the economic development director of the state of Oklahoma, right? Like, so to me, this isn't a, well, it's them versus us like thing. We're all literally immigrants,
Right.
unless you are a Native American. Like unless you're a Native American Indian, which like we know what we did to those folks, right? So
Yeah. Yeah. You're 100% right. And I think that ultimately, if we're able to remember that we are a nation of immigrants and that we all get here, and by the way, we're all here. So can we just come up with solutions to,
yeah,
and by addressing some of the issues, we're actually not making the pie smaller. We're making it bigger for everyone.
100%.
So it doesn't mean that I'm taking from you to do this. No, it just means that let's build together so that
Yeah.
everybody benefits. Because right now,
Yeah. What if I said to a friend, I was almost channeling you the other day. I felt this. I was talking to a friend before you and I had met formally, but it's just based on how you communicate online. And I said to this friend who's Republican in the traditional sense, but he's flirted with the MAGA side of things,
Mhm.
um, because he's intellectually lazy. I love him, but it's too easy, right? And I said to him, I was like, let's frame this completely differently. What if you got to keep basically everything that you have, like that you have that are the advantages? You have stable health care for you and your family. Your kids go to get a good education. You live in the house that you want to live in the neighborhood you live in. You have your 2 cars that you love. You have your business that you own that you like. You get, what if you got to keep basically all of that? But then we created systems or new tools or new pathways for everybody else to have that. I was like, why would you care? Like just in the super selfish, like simplest, why would you care? And he was like, well, I mean, I guess I wouldn't care then. And I was like, okay. I was like, then we're done talking about this. I said, I don't care how you vote. I can't control how you vote. I just want you to vote. I was like, but at the end of the day, by the way, if you believe what you just said to me, like, well, I guess then it makes sense. Then you know how you should vote, right? I was like, because that's it. It's that simple.
Exactly.
we have this, we're sitting in this amazing opportunity where people like you, or people like my friend Nora Cadenia, from Supply Chain
Yes,
Capital.
I know her, by the way.
Right? And like, Norma is incredible. What a gift to the society she is as a human being, right? But like, you see this, holy cow, let me tell you what I see in the American economy of 2050 when we rebuild it this way. Like, if you thought that we were a boom power prosperity for everybody in 1950 and 1960, holy cow, let me tell you what it could be in 2050. Like, because I know how we can do this. Like, who would say no to that? Right? That it makes no sense to be resistant to that. So thank you for illuminating that. Thank you for helping kind of synthesize how easy it is for people to see that we're not trying to, this is not a regression. This is a positive net add that ironically, those with are probably just going to wind up with more.
Yes, 100%.
Right? Because everybody else got some.
100%. 100%.
That's amazing. Okay. Tell us all about Stitch Crew and Vest Her, right? So this is your commercial opportunity, so to speak. So help us understand kind of the why, the what. We talked a little bit about you and your husband in 2017. You started this, but like, let talk about the work that it does, either retrospectively or going forward, things that you're working on. Just tell us all about both of those things. Just take the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So Stitch Crew is a nonprofit organization that we established in 2017. We started with our own money because everybody told us that we were crazy, that entrepreneurship wasn't real economic development. Because as I tell people, I'm a recovering economic developer. Because unfortunately, the way we measure economic development in a lot of ways is tied to job creation as opposed to wealth creation. And anyways, but so everybody told us no. And so Chris and I started it with our own resources and our own capital. And then we started getting, bigger brands and bigger names behind us. But basically, what we do is we create programming and provide non-dilutive funding through grants to the new majority entrepreneurs that are building meaningful companies that need to exist, but they often lack resources, capital, networks to get started and or to grow. And I think that's an important definition because there's a lot of programming that focuses on startups, right? Like people that have ideas and how did they get started. We focus more on existing businesses and their ability to grow. Because like if you look at Latinos, we have a Latino accelerator, for example, that provides $15,000 to Latino-owned businesses so that they can get to their first $1 million, right? Like,
okay,
it's not just a 15,000. We don't have full.
No. Yeah, that's the seed starting point.
Right.
Yeah.
And we work as a cohort to create ideas and to build a plan to get them to their first million. And that's important because, Latinos already own 5 million businesses across the United States. Nobody needs to tell us to become an entrepreneurs. I think it's in our blood in a lot of ways.
It is 100% in the DNA.
Yeah. The challenge is less than 3% of those Latino-owned businesses reach revenues of $1 million or more in annual revenue.
Okay.
And so we're focused on with our fund, which I'll speak to it later, obviously we invest in high growth companies and companies that could potentially reach that level of scalability. But with Stitch Crew, we're very intentional about listen, I'm not in the business of creating another Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg. I'm in the business. I rather help 100 Latino-owned businesses or 100 women or 100 Indigenous-owned women get to their first million because we'll be able to see the economic impact faster in the communities that they're representing.
Sure. Right. I mean, right. So maybe it's less of like a 0 to 1 and more of like a 1 to 5 kind of thing. And then I'm picturing, as I listen to you, I'm closing my eyes and I'm picturing a business owner with like a kick-ass business in Edmond or in Oklahoma City or in Tulsa. And then you come along and you help her or them to expand. And now all of a sudden they're like, holy crap, like we're growing. And now we can do that second location. Our first location's in Oklahoma City. Now we can do that second location in Dallas where we have family and we know we have potential customers waiting for us. And next thing you know, you've helped fuel regional firms, right? And now all of a sudden regional firms now have some sway. And now all of a sudden they're taking over 6 states and they're in Arkansas and Missouri and da-da-da. And, that's okay. That's
Yeah.
I mean, that's economic development, but that's like what economic development should be,
Yes.
right? Like that's because it's economic and it's human development, right? It's not economic development around like which company headquarters real estate facility is in our
Right.
office in our city, or how many jobs did those people who moved to our city create, and
That's
then we
right.
stop measuring.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it's focused on organic growth, right? Like helping small businesses generate wealth. And then we know that that's going to compound much faster and in much larger ways. And to your point about economic development, a lot of what we do in economic development is actually not net new job creation. A lot of times we're just moving jobs around, right? Uh,
Sure.
Elon Musk doesn't like California policy, so he's going to move a lot of those jobs to Texas. They're not net new
Yeah.
jobs. He's just moving
Right.
them to another. So while instead, if you support local entrepreneurs, small entrepreneurs, those are net new jobs, as they grow and
Sure.
as they expand. So
No,
yeah,
100%.
definitely. I think people are starting to get it. I see more of my economic development peers focusing more on entrepreneurship, but it's certainly taken a while.
No, that's impressive. All right, and it also makes me think. I'll mention because he's a show alumni. You should meet him. There's a good friend of mine, Isaac McCoy, former guest in the prior iteration of the show, kind of a couple years ago. And Isaac is very much about that. And Isaac's thesis is essentially around helping legacy businesses, so existing legacy businesses that are family owned by brown and black family owners in different communities to like preserve and continue those businesses. So
Yeah,
in one example he always gives, it's this idea of like the kids of the people that started the local pharmacy chain that now has 6 locations in Dallas or something, or the hospital company that has 2 hospitals. Like the kids don't want to take over that business, right? So that could very well die, right? That hospital in that community could very well die and not be run or operated by, in this case, in this example, like African American leadership, right? And so he comes in private equity kind of, but with very intentional like
hmm,
continued growth, stay in the community,
yeah,
keep this business vibrant under the same type of leadership that appreciated how it was valued in the community, and kind of almost like stepping in from the outside to fill that generational gap that maybe wasn't interested. You're on the front end of that similar kind of
yeah.
work, is
So,
laying this foundation to create community. Okay, so tell us about Vest and Vest Her.
yeah. So again, so with Stitch Crew, non-dilutive grants and programming to the new majority entrepreneurs, by the way, across the nation. So even though we're in Oklahoma, most of our programs are across the nation. And with Vest, we started Vest in 2020 because of the disproportionate effect the pandemic had on women at work, with a lot of women exiting. So Vest has a two-pronged approach. One is we're a peer group of women professionals from C-suite all the way to emerging leaders. And then we launched a fund to invest in women-led solutions that are building, for solutions for women, working families, and inclusive employers.
Awesome. You've mentioned a couple of times now in this section, you've mentioned community a few times, and obviously peer networks very specifically just now. How important do you think that is, specific to the new majority entrepreneur? How important is community and participating in community and being parts of peer, like active cohorts is another word you use. Like, how critical do you think that is to the way that we do business going forward?
It's uber critical. In fact, our slogan at Stitch Crew is "Nobody builds companies alone." Again, because we're trying to move away from that lone wolf self-made billionaire. Because
Yeah,
one, it doesn't exist. You need customers, you need employees. It's like you don't become self millionaire just by its own.
yeah,
But also because it's hard as hell to be an entrepreneur, right? It's
it is.
all. And so you need and what do we do as entrepreneurs often? We retract, right? We keep everything to ourselves. We don't want to talk about our failures. We don't want to talk, and it's so important because it affects our mental.
Preach, Sister Erica. I just admitted that to my daughter yesterday that I had like kind of a dark couple of weeks in
Yes,
September because whether people believe it or not, I'm building this podcast and media into a business. Like I am an entrepreneur again, right? In this sense, and it's hard.
it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard. It can be like,
And I'm a middle-aged white guy with privilege. Like, so if it's hard for me,
yeah, it's hard for everyone, regardless of what it is. And I tell people, if you look at very successful, whether they tell you or not, very successful executive, or there's YPO, right? The Young Presidents Organization. They know that it's not even about capital access, it's about network access. Whether we
Yeah.
like it or not, it's about who we know, right? Not what we know,
100%.
but who we know. And we still hire, promote, appoint, invest in networks. Uh,
Yep.
so even from that perspective, if you want to attach it to, like, you need resources, people that know what they're doing and you can tap into. That's why it's important to have peer networks and community.
Yeah.
Also for the mental health, right? Also to be able, because like as an entrepreneur, unless you have family that has been there, it's really hard. Like, who are you going to rely on? But if you
Right.
talk to, it helps with isolation, it helps with mental health, it helps problem solve with people that have actually been there or are going through it at the same time you are. So it takes the shame away from it, or the discomfort in talking about some of the challenges. So that's why
Yeah.
we think that community is everything with everything that we do.
You are a proud Latina. You talk openly about that. I've never stopped to ask. I think Mexicana.
Mexicana, yeah, Chihuahua,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay, from Chihuahua.
yeah,
Awesome.
yeah,
Okay. I love Chihuahua State and the city and Juarez and the whole region. I got a
yes.
lot of great friends in that region. Um, talk a little bit about what you see in the work that in the investments that you make through Vest, in the work that you do through Stitch Crew. Like, because there's sometimes it's the resistance comes from inside, right? From
Mhm.
inside the family, right? So I mean, and I hear a lot of that in we just interviewed this incredible young woman, Carol Shi, Taiwanese immigrant to the U.S., and like she talked a lot about just that the disconnect between like her Asian upbringing
Yeah.
and expectations from her parents and her entrepreneurial spirit, right? And I talk with every day Latinas, right, that are
Mhm.
just battling with that. Like, but my mom says, like, this is nuts. Like, why wouldn't you just take that job,
Mhm.
right, with health benefits and with like a pretend pension someday in the future? Like, why would you do this? And this is so risky. Like, do you see a lot of that daily in your work? And then yourself as a proud, hardworking, successful, however we define that, Mexicana. How do you help people to get past that, to get over that?
Yeah. I think by building community, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But I think it's you're right on some of the challenges. So out of the investments that we so far, we made 10 investments, seven of which have been in women of color, many of them immigrants. And I mean, imagine you're, especially if you're a first gen, right? Imagine your immigrant parents come into this nation working two jobs, three jobs sometimes, doing everything they can, sacrificing everything they know to give you a better chance. And then for you to say, well, instead of being a doctor or instead of being like a safe choice, I'm going to try this entrepreneurial deal, even though we know
Right.
2% of capital goes to women and less than 1% goes to Latinos. And I mean, of course, there's going to be a lot of like, what? Are you sure? I think it comes from a good place, a protective space.
Of course. Yeah.
But yeah, so it's hard to relate to people if they're trying to protect you and they're trying to, like, steer you in another way. But
Yeah.
again, it's so important. So how we coach, women that we invest actually get a vest membership so that they can tap into the vest network, so more women.
Okay.
And I think the more that the more that we take the stigma away from talking about the hardships of being an entrepreneur, from talking about the hardships of being a woman owned business. Um,
Yeah. And being a woman, a business owner, and caregiver
exactly.
to potentially elder family members, to kids, to the household, etc. So your work is so just like synonymous
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
redefining the care economy and the future of work. With like, we're doing that by supporting you today in taking your business from 100,000 in revenue to 1 million in revenue.
Exactly. I've actually had, thank you for saying that. I've actually had LPs as I'm still fundraising for the fund, talking about LPs saying, oh, you're doing too much. They consider it a risk that we have the peer network plus the fund and all of
Yeah.
that.
Right.
But you just said it. No, there's so much intricacy, and we're actually built
Oh.
very intentionally to build community and build like a
Yeah.
surrounding support system around the people that we're investing in. So there.
I mean, arguably, a limited partner investor, institutional investors who invest in venture capitalists, for people who don't know,
Mhm.
like they should salivate at the idea that you essentially have and are building a platform, right? It's a care platform
Exactly.
and it's a human platform, not a maybe software powered platform, but it is a fly, to use another one of their phrases, it's a flywheel of human effect and care and knowledge and resource sharing and access, and that solidifies the owners of the businesses that you invest in or who come through your programs.
Mhm.
So yeah, hey LPs, if you're listening, quit, get out of your own way. Like, see the obvious thing that I see. I'm not an LP. All right, so I have just this totally personal question for you. Like, I read the statistics, the same ones that you do, that we all do, right? Like, I've read some data. I mean, it could take us 100 years for women to achieve pay equity. I've read data that says it could be 321 years.
Mhm.
I think, like, from Shelley's Alice at the female quotient, I saw some number like that. It's like 321 years until we achieve pay equity and all this, and, or gender equity, pay equity, all of that, right? Let alone, we're not even talking investment equity and venture capital for women or for people of color, which, like, that might take, I don't know, 10 centuries. Um, Knowing that is true, like, why do you get up every day and go fight for this? Like, it's not, I love what you're doing. It's not going to happen in our lifetimes. Why do you fight?
Because I want that to be my legacy, right? I have two beautiful girls, both Latinas, both, one of them is queer. I want them to have the same opportunities as anyone else, regardless of, how they identify or what region they decide to live in. I want them to know that I did everything I could while I was alive, not just to parent them, but also to make the a more level playing field for them to operate in. Um, and if they decide to have children, then they can pay it forward and do the same. And I would tell you, I've seen all of the statistics that you have, but one of the reason, and you mentioned this as we opened this discussion, as to, I always say everything's political. Um, One way in which we can shorten that, those statistics, or that time frame, to shorten those statistics, is by changing our policies, right? Because if we want systems to change, that often requires policy change. And
Yep.
so, but if we don't engage, and if we don't have these conversations, and if we're not holding people accountable, and if we are not being political, yeah, it's going to take that long for us to do it,
Yeah.
because we can't. One venture capital fund is not going to do it. I know that
No.
what we're doing is, it's just a minimal step towards that direction. But if we are able to change policies, if we're able to change system, that expedites the whole process. So that's why I
No.
get so
100% true.
politically involved.
Good for you. No, that's why you get up every day and fight. You're fighting. And now, thank you for vulnerably sharing, like, who you're fighting for,
Yeah.
in your own home, and the why behind your fight. Because we need you. The world needs, frankly. I mean, it's not hyperbolic just to make you feel good about yourself. Like, the world literally needs. If we were designing a system, every city needs like 10 to 20 or 20 to 50 of you, right? Like, the United States could probably do with 5,000 Erika Lucases doing exactly the work that you are doing at exactly the same level that you're doing. Like, if we had 5,000 of you, we would unlock so much more economic potential and progress for so many more people. Before we can have 5,000, we have to have you. So thank you for leading the way that you do. A bunch of different things I want to talk about. We're not going to get to it all today because I don't want to keep you all afternoon, but this is an almost impossible question, but maybe you could give us a couple of ideas on that we could take away from this. If I literally said to you today, like, I'm Aladdin, I get to grant you the wish. How would you design a better capital? And notice, I'm not going to call it venture capital system,
Mhm.
because that presupposes kind of this is what it is, right? How would you design a better capital funding industry or system from scratch?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I love this question because I'm in venture capital, but I got to tell you, I can't stand my industry. And I, and I think that we've done a disservice when we talk about capital access, particularly for women and people of color, in focusing a lot and or romanticizing even with venture capital because it gives the impression that it's sexy, but it's actually not at all.
No, that may be the most prescient, powerful thing you've said amongst many is this idea, those two words, this that it's we romanticize it and that it's like sexy and alluring, and it's neither of those
Oh
things.
my gosh, no. I'm just a I have to sell LPs to invest in the fund, and then I have to sell on to companies to take our checks and get us to invest in them. So, anyways, but back to your question, which I love this question because I think it's important to create awareness in the fact that less than 2% of startups ever raise venture capital. It's very hard. It's meant it's a great solution for those that are building high scalable companies, but it also matters a lot on how you want to build, what business model you're in, and all of that stuff. So we have that problem. Out of all the capital spent, less than 2% goes to women, blah blah blah, and into very narrow niche of type of companies. Then we have debt financing, right? Which you have to have 2 years of proven experience, collateral. It really works for working capital, not necessary growth, all of these challenges. And you have about 80% of entrepreneurs that don't fit either category, right?
Right.
And so I want to create solutions for that 80%. Now, what type of mechanisms or funnels or models we should use? I'm talking to a lot of my colleagues about that.
Awesome.
And I don't have a solution or a specific one that I want to point out
Right.
to you, but I do think that that's the biggest opportunity. It's how do we
and
create
and
solutions?
there's energy amongst leaders like yourself,
Yes,
right? Forward thinkers, new majority thinkers. There's energy amongst you all to say we got to keep brainstorming this. We got to
yeah,
keep ideating this. We got to keep chipping away at this because there has to be better ways.
yes, yes. We recognize we
That's
need
awesome.
more right size capital for a lot more entrepreneurs.
That's awesome and very gratifying for me. I find myself saying on the show often, I think I've said it in a couple of recent interviews, like at the end of the episode, I'm like, I'm just glad that somebody like you exists and gets up every day to tackle this thing that I like or that most people don't think about, right? Because thank God you exist, right? And thank God your peers exist in the sense that there are people that are literally obsessing, right, about how to do this differently and create different systems from scratch, how to adjust and adapt current systems that exist that have the potential to be better, how to leverage it all, how to kind of, as you say, and I think it's naive that we all talk about this kind of like siloed world of like private sector, public sector, government. Like that's all nonsense. Like the prosperity of our country, again, not to be like I'm doing an episode about FDR, but like the prosperity of our country that we live in the modern world is solely as a result of a huge injection and investment over a decade and a half, if not more, of government capital and public monies alongside private monies and creating
Yes.
private markets. So like it's not like a well maybe that would work. No. That's literally all that worked
Yeah.
that got us to where we are. And then we tried it a different way, and we're now realizing the different way didn't work. And
Right.
so maybe we turn the notch back and like go back and oh we've like you said you alluded to before we've boom for manufacturing business in the U.S. in the last couple of years. Why? Because the government decided to unleash government capital and government resources alongside private markets to incentivize people to do this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Exactly. At some point, private capital, and whether it's through foundations or private investments, it was meant to de risk public investments that weren't taking place yet or that,
yeah,
were yet to be proved. We need to go back to that, right? Like public
yeah.
private partnerships where private capital is de risking some and then public investments are investing in things, proven theories.
Yeah, I love that. I have one last big philosophical question before we get to our closing segment. And this might almost be impossible to answer, but I want you to give it a crack. Like, of all the things we've discussed today, what is one truth or one reality that most people seem to get wrong or that most people just don't seem to understand that you really want people to take away from today's conversation? Like, if there's one thing that, like, if you just understood this about this, like, you'd get why we're doing what we're doing. Like, what is that one thing?
Yeah. One thing, and close to my heart, because although I'm very proud to say that women are outpacing our male peers in terms of launching companies, so we're launching more companies than ever before, Latinas 6 times faster than others. I also know why they're doing it, right? And that's because the typical corporate setting or typical workspaces is not working for them. So they're quitting those jobs and starting new businesses, right?
Okay.
So we need accountability into the corporate setting and those spaces to recognize that we're failing women, we're failing working parents and employees. So, with that in mind, I think that the takeaway that I would want people to know is that we need to stop fixing women and instead focus on fixing workspaces, right?
That's
Because what
awesome.
do we always tell women that are trying to get into the labor force and move into the C suite? Get coaching, get better at negotiating, get better. So, it's always focus on the individual. Let's fix the
Right.
individual, let's fix women. And
Which implies that the system works.
that the system work and that there's something wrong with women at work, when in reality is workplaces were not designed with women in mind, right? And so
Wow.
we need to keep that in mind, and we need to stop fixing workplaces as opposed to women.
That's huge. That's wow. You answered that question. I'm not surprised, but I'm impressed. That was awesome. Okay, last question. And in this closing segment, I always like to try and make it a bit more actionable, so that you and I just covered we just ran like a, I don't know if this is like an MBA class or like a history of economics. This was a lot, and we could probably do a seminar on this at some university if they ever wanted to bring us in as a tag team. I'd be grateful to be alongside you in that setting, but let's in this case kind of leave our audience with maybe 2 or 3 specific things, kind of a couple of tangible takeaways that they can go and try and think about applying in their lives next week, whether they're in Edmond, Oklahoma, or Los Angeles, or wherever they might be. Right. So my question: what are 2 or 3 specific ways that entrepreneurs, and in particular, you know what? Let's just hone in on new majority entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs, immigrant women of color, or entrepreneurs of color. What are 2 or 3 specific ways that those folks should leverage peer networks or communities like Vest or any that they have in their community locally to strengthen their business and accelerate growth? So 2 or 3 ways that, hey, if you're not a part of a community or a cohort or a peer group in your community, next week when you listen to this episode in a few weeks, like, you should go look this up. This is what you should try and do. What are 2 or 3 specific suggestions?
Yeah. So obviously, one, find the right peer community, right? Because there is, again, with entrepreneurship, I think a lot of people are romanticizing with the fact of becoming an entrepreneur. And so they go to all of the meetups and all of the networkings, and sometimes only to find out that they're not your right community. So you have to be intentional about making sure that you're finding the right type of community that's going to be supportive to you. You also need to figure out, what are you looking for? Are you looking for a community of peers to support you? Or are you looking for a community of peers in the care economy and healthcare and finance to help you expand
Okay.
your networks so that you can access funds or fundraising? Or so you need to take the time, first of all, before you join any peer communities, to say, what do I want and why do I want it? And then go find those communities.
Okay.
That way you can be intentional about it. And again, if I'm talking to women or working families, we don't have time to network. We don't have
Right.
time to join another Slack channel or another WhatsApp chat community. So we have to be very intentional. So that's number one, right? Take the time to really
Yeah,
figure out what
that's
you
huge.
need and why you need it, and then join the community. And I can tell.
Yeah, that's big.
Yeah, and so the second one is, after having supporting hundreds of women entrepreneurs in general, I would tell you that I have seen founders that really contribute, give first, right? Because if you
Mm,
just go wanting to take away something, it doesn't work. You have to build meaningful relationships. So go with the mindset of, like, I'm going to contribute so much that people will not be able to say no to me when I need something.
that's awesome.
So just know that it's a give and back way if you really want to build meaningful connections. And those meaningful connections are going to help you fundraise. They're going to help you close your first pilot. They're going to help and amplify your message when you launch new products or when you close your fundraising round or whatever it is. but you need to build the meaningful connections first.
I love that. I'm gonna shout out my dad because it was one of his favorite phrases that he shared with us all the time as kids. And then as I was working for him coming out of college, which you'll love and you can use it. Like he always said his philosophy was give, ask.
Yes.
Right.
Like,
And then of course he took it to the extreme and he tied it to like, give twice as much as you ask for. Right. You have 2 ears and 1 mouth because you should listen more than you talk. Right. That was his whole kind of general demeanor. Catholic Jesuit, like give service of others type of person, right? St. Thomas Aquinas was like his hero. So that is awesome. This was a pleasure. Like, I mean, it was fun, informative. Like I'm inspired, but it was also just an absolute pleasure. This is our first time meeting in person. This is in person, I call it in today's world. And you are absolutely everything that I suspected or expected that you would be for 2 reasons. We talked about it off air prior to the show, but because you came referred to us so strongly by people that I absolutely care about and really, really, really respect. And so that kind of always, it's like you said, it's our networks of the people that we are intentional about, to your last point. And then when new people come into that from those people, it's always got the potential to be magical. But then also just from following you online, as obviously huge numbers of people do, and following your work and your passion for both your work on the day-to-day basis and then your citizen work, I'll call it, in our greater society. And so you are everything in this conversation that I thought you would be, and I'm super grateful for it. I'm grateful for your energy. I am deeply, as an American citizen and fellow voter, I'm deeply grateful for all the work that you're doing around this particular election, and I know it's going to continue on beyond this election cycle, but it's such a critically important moment in the history of our country and towards the future of what we're leaning towards. So thank you for spending some time with me today and trying to leave the world a little bit better place than we found it before, right?
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. I appreciate what you're doing and for giving me the space to share a little bit more about what we're doing.
My pleasure. And it's always good to hang out with a good person from Oklahoma every once in a while. So yes, I appreciate that. How can folks in our audience connect with you or follow you or connect or find out or subscribe or sign up for things with Stitch Crew or with Vest?
Yeah, thank you. So at Stitch Crew, www.stitchcrew.com. Subscribe to our newsletter. We actually promote not just our program, but we promote programs and grants from other organizations that we partner with, and even if we don't partner with. So it's a great resource network. And then Vest is www.vesther.co, so without the M. And you can sign up also to our newsletter. If you want to reach me, I'm really responsive on social media, primarily LinkedIn, Instagram, and so just reach out.
And watch for her in the little Zoom box on the next Oprah presidential special. Maybe there will be an Oprah inauguration celebration special, and you'll be in there. That would be the ideal. That's our hope for your daughter, my future grandson, your daughters, my daughter, everybody, right? So that's awesome. Thank you so much, Erika. This is terrific.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode as much as I did recording it. As always, we thank you so much for listening and watching. Today's show was recorded here in Los Angeles and produced by the incomparable Deanna Bernal in Mexico City. We can only grow this show by you listening and sharing the show with friends. So please find, like, follow, subscribe, and share our audio-only show on Spotify, Apple, or via any other popular podcasting platforms, as well as find the video version of our show now available on our YouTube channel over at Entrepreneurial Thinkers. And of course, you can follow along on our various social media platforms for fun and informative clips and content at Entrepreneurial Thinkers, wherever you can find us. And if you'd like to connect with me, you can find me at I Am Rob Ryan on just about any social media platform. Gracias, thank you, and have an awesome day.